All right, welcome to our Persevering Through the NBCT Journey webinar, which is hosted by the Kentucky Network to Transform Teaching, and we've got several partners on the call that are helping us with our call. Already addressed some of the Zoom logistics, but just a reminder to mute yourself if you're not one of the presenters speaking, and if you have questions, to pop those in the chat box. There will be, if we have time, an opportunity at the end to raise your hand and unmute yourself if to present questions then too as well. My name is Suzanne Farmer, and I'm a board certified teacher in early childhood generalist, and I'm the director of the Kentucky Network to Transform Teaching, which is a grant, a national grant that is in partnership with the National Board.
Morning, everyone. I'm Kate Grindon. I currently work as an effectiveness coach for the Kentucky Department of Education. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. I certified in early adolescent English language arts, and then I've been a CSP, formerly known as a mentor, for about 9 years.
Hi, my name is Holly Bloodworth. I'm an early childhood generalist. I've taught for 31 years. I am currently a literacy consultant for West Kentucky Educational Co-op and do work with Jumpstart and those kinds of things through KEA, and looking forward to helping you all today through this webinar.
So one of the things that we wanted to start with was this idea of steel and how steel is created. I don't know if you know anything about metals, but steel is made from iron, but it's not just heated iron. You don't take iron, you put it in a fire, and then boom, magically you get steel. The fire actually does things to it. And we wanted to start with this because that is so analogous to the National Board process itself. One of the candidates with whom I work said to me when she didn't get the score she wanted, she asked me, does this mean that I'm not National Board material? And the answer is no. You are not, anyone, all of us, are not nationally board certified teachers who just haven't been acknowledged yet. That's not how this process works. What this process does is just like the iron, it goes into the fire, it burns you, it messes with you, it purifies you, that stuff gets added, and at the end, you become steel. This process is not about taking someone who's already a nationally board certified teacher who just hasn't been acknowledged yet and knighting them as an NBCT. It's about turning you into this reflective thinker. It's about the process. It's about the journey. So my answer to her is the same thing I would tell anyone. It just means you're not done cooking yet. There is more cooking that has to happen. And so we're here to support you in that. But please know, if you didn't get the scores you wanted, it's not commentary on you as a person. It just means you're not done yet. That's all it means.
And, you know, we're kind of using that idea of a journey today as an analogy throughout the presentation, because when you started the process, you probably felt like you were embarking on this wonderful journey that was going to be like rainbows and sunshine and just all these wonderful things about teaching. And, you know, National Board Certification is that in a sense, but it's really difficult. I mean, it's not like it's just easy. And I think the journey part is the important part to remember. You know, each one of us has different things going on in our lives, and different things, different combinations of children, and just different things that we have to deal with. So everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. And that's one of the beautiful things about the way National Board has structured things now, is that it allows your journey to match your situation more. So if you didn't certify this go round, you still have opportunity, because that's part of the process. And this journey that you're going on, it may end up being a little bit longer, but it's just more opportunity to grow. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about that and some of the potholes.
So I'm sure that in your process there may have been, I'm getting feedback. All right, sorry, is that better?
Yes.
I'm sure that in your process, there have been times where it's felt like this and not the smooth rainbows and sunshine. And I think this is true of everyone, even when they are pleased with their first set of scores that they receive back. There's times in the journey that are muddy and tough, and you get stuck, and you need help to get yourself back on the road. I think that one of the things that's especially tricky with this new rollout of the national board process is the people who embarked on this journey, that you all were really brave to start a process when you didn't know where the road was going. You knew that you wanted to become board certified, but you didn't know what the floor or what the achievement score had to be. That wasn't set yet. You didn't know exactly what all the components were going to look like if you started a couple years ago.
Pioneers.
You're pioneers. So that's a scary journey. And so there have been some misconceptions, I think, around floor score because we didn't have an achieve score set, which makes that a lot more confusing. We've got 3 board certified teachers that have graciously given us some time today to talk a little bit more about how you're probably feeling right now, because they've been there too. They struggled to achieve certification on the first try, so they persisted, and they're going to talk a little bit about those emotions and their story today. And really just we're going to spend some time talking about all of this, but I think one of the things that is important to know is that many of the people who may have certified this try, given the flexibility of the process, have actually submitted more than one. They've already done some retakes. So I know personally that most of the NBCTs that I know that just certified retook a component while they were finishing up. So there's a lot to consider, and I know that a lot of people that are disappointed in their scores are dealing with things like a change in administration or death or divorce or adoption. There's a lot of other factors that can really impact this, and you need to give yourself some space to give yourself a little room to grow and to and I think that the best thing to do is for us to hear from our guests. So
our first NBCT that's going to share a little bit of her personal story is Jennifer Helton. She's a reading specialist at Newport Primary School in Newport, Kentucky. So welcome, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing.
No problem. Good morning. Glad to be here. Like many of the teachers who decided to pursue National Board Certification, I knew it was tough. I knew the likelihood of certifying the first time was not great. But like many of you, I thought, I'm a good student. I've always been a good student. I can do this. Those people who don't certify the first time, it's not me. I'm going to make it. And I didn't. 9 years later, it still gets me. It was humbling. I was crushed. And I mean crushed. I didn't go to work for 2 days. I felt like a complete failure as a teacher. I thought, I can't go face these people. I thought I was going to do this, and now everybody's going to go, oh my gosh, she didn't certify. She's terrible. She sucks. What the hell? Sorry. But it was humbling, to say the least. So it took me well over a month before I could decide that I was going to do it again. I thought about it. I really had to think a lot about my teaching, about the questions, about the process, and if I was willing to do it again. So after about a month, I was able to get a little distance and a little perspective and take a look and go, I don't think anything about what I was doing as a teacher had changed, but I really needed to look at how I had submitted my entries. So I was able to get a little perspective and some distance and decide that I was definitely going to try again, because as much as I was crushed, I also wasn't a quitter. So I decided that I was going to take a look at what they suggested and all of the things to say, you know, what you should retake, what would boost your score. And I decided to resubmit 2 entries to be on the safe side. And I just sort of had to give myself time to grieve in a sense and get myself together and realize that I'm not a crappy teacher. I'm not a failure. This was something that I just wasn't there yet. We tell our students a lot of times, no, you're not there yet. And that's really hard to face as an adult because this wasn't anything I had experienced before. I hadn't experienced these setbacks. If I pursued something, I achieved it. College wasn't really, it took work, but it wasn't tough. I didn't struggle with it. Master's degree, those sort of things, you do the work, you get your degree. National board certification isn't like that. It's not a guarantee if you just show up and do it that you're going to get that certification. So that was something that I really had to think about and take a step back and look at. And a lot of it was in how I had answered the questions in hindsight. And I got someone who I wasn't friends with. We were coworkers, but I wouldn't necessarily call us friends, to give me some feedback on my resubmissions. And her critique was tough. And there were a few times where I had to, at first I was defensive, and I thought, okay, she's just trying to help me. This didn't work the first time as much as I thought I was going to. So I really need to be open to that feedback and criticism and look where, no, my answers weren't as strong as they could be. And no, I didn't really go in and analyze and do all of the things that it was asking me to do. So it was definitely a growth process and very humbling. And it made me really think about what I was doing, how I was answering, and all of the things that eventually on that second go round, I did certify, and either one of my entries would have given me the score that I needed.
Wow. Thank you. That's really an awesome story. And, we often talk about grit and mindset and, growth mindset to our kids, but when it's time for us to demonstrate those things, it feels a little differently. So that probably made you a better teacher, having to go through that, since that wasn't something that you were typically dealt with, was, not being successful. So, sometimes it's the hard things that make us grow the most, I bet. So
absolutely.
Next, we have Rebecca Schleifer. Sorry. I practiced that even. But thank you, Rebecca, for being on here today. Rebecca is a librarian at Olmsted Academy North in Louisville, Kentucky. So welcome, and thank you for sharing some of your story today.
Absolutely. One thing that a lot of what Jennifer said really resonated with me. And one thing is it feels so public. Our school is like a community, and we support each other, and we share news and information. And so when you find out, you have to tell, not only do you have the bad news, but you've got to share it over and over and over again. And you worry about that perception and what people think about you. And that's completely normal. So I was glad that Jennifer said that. One thing that I think about now, and was important in the NBCT process, was you would never say the things that you say to yourself to a struggling student. So you really have to approach yourself with a lot of self-compassion and check yourself when you're getting into that negative mindset. It's so important. And to think about how you would approach a student who you love and care about and really want to be successful too. Because teachers are perfectionists on the whole, and they want everything to be just so. And we know that it's not, and it can't be. And so when I think about the way that I've grown both professionally and personally from that setback, it's been a good experience. And for me, there was never a question about going ahead. And I don't know why, honestly. It was just, I wanted this. I wanted to get it done. And so what I did, I reached out to other teachers who I admired and respected in the building, other NBCTs. That was important to me, to reach out to them. And what I found, and some of you may have found this, is that I was focusing on the instructions and looking for clues and reading the questions over and over and over. And on the second time around, what I did differently is I leaned into what I already knew. I leaned into know your students. I leaned into backwards planning. And when I was doing my writing, I was always trying to explain why. So it took some time to personally and professionally reflect and think about what I was going to do different. So it's just about being really kind to yourself and leaning into the expertise you already have.
Those are great messages, especially just self-love. We need to give ourselves permission to grieve, but we got to be kind to ourselves. And I think that's a great message too. And next we have Eddie Campbell on the call. Eddie is the Vice President of KEA. He is a music teacher. And Eddie, welcome.
I have to apologize. I think that it's not refreshed on my slide deck, and that's why Eddie's name's not appearing. So I'm going to try to fix that.
Oh, it's fine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eddie Campbell. Like Holly said, I am currently serving as the Vice President for the Kentucky Education Association. I'm certified in music, adolescent through young adult. And the first time, I remember it like it was yesterday, logging on, having to two or three times to actually get onto the site to see my scores, and then realizing that I had not certified. And when I really looked at it, I had not certified by 1 point. And it just ripped my heart out. I remember I closed the computer, I just went and sat in the chair, I wrapped up in the blanket, it was a snow day, and I was done. I was finished. I didn't think I was worthy of a national board certification, and felt I wasn't the teacher that I thought I was. And luckily, I was surrounded by wonderful people like Lisa Beecher-Kirk and Holly and some other national board certified teachers in my building who, when I got back, because like Rebecca and Jennifer said, everybody knows that you're going through the process because you talk to everybody about it. And, I had to share the information that I hadn't certified, but that support network that was around me lifted me up and said, it's not that you're not worthy of being a national board certified teacher. It's just, you need to persevere and you need to try it again. And it took me, over a month to decide, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. But what I did is I went back and looked at the feedback that I've gotten, and I actually looked at my scores, because once I found out I hadn't certified, I didn't look at it again. I didn't go back and dig through like I should have. And what I found was that on the entries that were actually about my teaching, the 2 entries that focused mostly in my classroom, I had done a really great job and scored really well on those. It was my professional entry that I didn't do as well as I thought I had done, and that was the one I felt the best about. And when I went back and read the entry in context to the feedback that I'd gotten, that I hadn't focused on what was important and how I was growing as a professional to really impact the students in my classroom. And it was like a light bulb came on, and I became re-energized, and I reapplied to take the component over, and just went back and really dedicated myself to see intentionally what I was doing professionally and how that was impacting not only the students that I was working with each and every day, but the colleagues that I had around me and my profession as a whole. And that led me and empowered me to want to do more and want to make bigger changes and to really step out of my comfort zone in my leadership path, which I attribute to where I am today, because knowing that I can be reflective and have that impact, not only professionally, but personally, told me that I needed to do this. And if you didn't certify this time, use that energy and really look at that information, and then go back and make those changes. One of the things like I said, I really didn't focus on the first time around was the impact that I was having on my students.
Well, thank you, Eddie, because your national board certification, I think, has really helped you as our KEA vice president. And I'm so glad that you persevered in that journey, and what a great model you are for all teachers. We all are persevering through our teaching journey in some way or the other. So thank you. And thank you, teachers, for being on today and sharing those your own journey. I know it can be hard kind of recalling those feelings, but I think it helps other people when they hear somebody that's gone through the same thing, and gives them hope and courage to go ahead and try this thing that is so worth it. So I know some of you all have to hop off, that were just joining us for a little while. So thank you very much. So what we're going to do next is we're going to, kind of like Eddie was a perfect segue, because that's what we want you all to start doing next, is to look at your feedback that you received on your entries. I've heard from a lot of people that it's, the feedback is so generic and those kinds of things. But if you dig a little bit deeper, I think there's a lot to be learned from that feedback. So let's start by looking, we're going to just kind of show you, kind of guide you through the steps that we would sort of take as we go through this. And hopefully these kinds of things will help you. So the first thing that you probably need to pull out is the scoring guide. This would be found on the website where it's candidate resources, and it says scoring guide. There is so much information in the scoring guide. You really need to read that. I've kind of been digging in that the last few days and have been really surprised how much information there is, and how much information I think that I could use with current candidates from this scoring guide. So there is a link here that will, Suzanne, they'll get this, the PowerPoint or the recording, so they can get to the link. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're not going to go there, but we've pulled out a few things right now just to kind of look at. The next slide shows your scoring guide. Shows your score report that you received when you want to go to the next slide. Let's see. Maybe mine's not updated. That's not what I have on mine.
I'm sorry. I can hop in here. I know that one of the reasons that we lifted these pages 40 and 41 is that we had some questions about the timeline and the rules for retake. Mm-hmm. So okay. It goes over that in pages 40 and 41 of your scoring guide.
Okay. So when you look at the scoring guide, you'll see some important things to consider. You can attempt you've done the 4 components, or maybe you haven't. Some of you are still submitting things right now and haven't submitted everything, but you do have a 5-year window to achieve certification. So you have, the first 3 years generally is when you submit your components, and then 2 years additional to resubmit. However, you may have done that a little bit differently, but you do have 5 years. You can try things, you can resubmit things 2 times. So there's no minimum or maximum score, but there is the floor score is for the sections, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So those are just some important retake considerations there, and just kind of some rules. Do you see?
Well, and just to clarify, you have to submit everything the first time within the first 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then you have a total, you have up to that whole 5 years to do all of your resubmissions if you do any resubmissions. So if you submitted everything in 1 year, you'd have still the 4 years to deal with resubmission, and you can take yours off as long as you still meet those deadlines.
All right, but just 2 retake attempts for each one.
Right.
Now, if you did receive a 0 on something, In the scoring report, it does talk a little bit about why that you might have gotten that. If you didn't submit a major piece of evidence, or your recordings weren't viewable, or you left out part of a constructed response, those kinds of things. So I don't know if any of you received a 0 on anything, but in the scoring guide, it really goes through and tells, kind of explains what the different things mean.
And there's even more listed in the report. This is just a partial list.
Mm-hmm. And then not scoreable is another thing that you could have gotten. And there's the list there of some things that it could be. And this may not be the complete list, but it's in the scoring guide. So if you received an NS, not scoreable, then you should look at the bullets and see if one of those would be why it was not scoreable.
There's also some more non-score and 0 within the general portfolio directions, and perhaps the directions for your certificate area if it has some specific rules. If you got non-scored, you can submit a written inquiry to National Board, and they'll do an investigation and email you back as to why you got a non-score if you have questions.
And Suzanne just mentioned the general portfolio directions. I think that's an overlooked resource. So you do have your directions for your component, but don't forget to really look at the general directions too, because there's information in there that is for everyone. They don't repeat it necessarily in your component directions. So if you missed something, it may be that you didn't look at the general directions or thought your component directions took the place of the general directions, but you really need to be well versed in both. Now, the scoring guide also has these feedback statements. So each component has the feedback statements for the different levels. And we'll talk a little bit about a specific example. Kate's going to lead us through that in a few minutes. But this is like if you scored a level 2, which there's a range that would be a level 2, then these are the feedback statements that could have been assigned to you. So it's really, what you need to do is get your feedback statements and compare it to the ones that match the level of your score.
And we'll show you how you know which level you are in a minute.
There's a little table. So the power is going to be in figuring out which ones they gave you as opposed to which ones they didn't. And we'll kind of talk, Kate's going to walk us through that too, with just, that kind of gives you an idea of the areas where your strengths were and the areas where you were weaker. So, as you look through your feedback, you may look for patterns. As I've worked with some candidates kind of trying to decide what they're going to do next, it's pretty interesting how you see patterns across the feedback. One of the candidates that I work with, anything that has to do with learning environment and those kinds of things, she was really strong across all of the different 5 core propositions. So what kind of feedback did you get, and what kind, was evidence? Was that the thing that popped up the most for you? So just and start to analyze where your areas for growth lie.
And if you want to drop in the chat box where you an area that you feel like you got feedback that is something that you wanted to work on. I know that when we did our survey, it was overwhelming. Everyone said that they needed more evidence in their feedback. So if you want to just take a minute, if you have a piece of feedback that you received a lot, we can we can address that as we're going through this too.
So just some steps that you may want to take is, first of all, look at your feedback statements. And this is, kind of going with our journey analogy. This is kind of like when you're taking your driver's test and you're being assessed, so look at the feedback that you got, like what did the assessor say? What feedback statements did they assign? And target those areas for improvement. Then, read the standardized feedback statements and look at the copy of your portfolio component. So look at your component in light of those feedback statements. Of course, those feedback statements are aligned with the rubric that you had for that. So now just look back at the directions and see, with those things in mind, was there somewhere that you just misinterpreted something, or did you read something into it that wasn't there, or miss something? And then read your 5 core props. Those are, we kind of forget, we have our standards, but it's also the 5 core props and the architecture of accomplished teaching, all of those things working together that help us with this portfolio process. So look at your 5 core props, your standards, and the rubric, and identify where you could have strengthened your original entry. So kind of, planning your map. And then based on that, you need, kind of figure out what would get you to the place that you want to go. So planning your next steps based off of that.
So here's some ranges for you, because when you look in your scoring guide, they're not going to say, if you got a 2.75, here are your feedback statements. If you got a 1.2, here are yours. We do this in ranges. So for instance, if you were anywhere between a 1.75 and a 2.25, it doesn't matter where you were in that, you are considered in the level 2 range. So when you go to the scoring guide and you look at that, those, you're going to want to make sure you're following along with the level 2 statements. Those are the feedback statements that apply to you, right? So now we're going to look at an actual example. So that's exactly the example that we have. So this is a real life example from someone who was in that range, a 1.75 to a 2.25. This was her component 3.
Actually, I want to clarify, Kate, on this slide. This is the feedback statements from the scoring guide that relate to her area.
So these are all of them.
This is all of them. And I just wanted to point out that when you go to that part in the scoring guide, you're going to look for the part at the top. So like if we're looking at, she scored it the level 2, so that at the top it says component 3, score 2, because they have all of the portfolio components and the different levels. So there's like 10 pages of them. Right. And then I wanted to also point out where the blue arrows are. That, yes, I was just gonna. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
No, you're good. Go for it.
That those, where the blue arrows are, that lists how those statements relate to the 5 core propositions. And it may be that not all 5 core propositions are aligned to that component. We only see core prop 5 teachers or members of learning communities with component 4.
So this is going to come up in a moment when Suzanne's going to talk more about this, but you'll notice which feedback statements align to which core proposition. So you can start to look for patterns. Are the things that you need to make sure you're going back and reviewing for yourself, and also where your growth or where your strength areas. What are the things, which core props are you already strong in? So as Suzanne was saying, this is the example. These are the feedback statements from level 2 for component 3. So in this particular example, this one woman got these 5 statements as feedback, all right? So these are the 5 areas, the 5 pieces of feedback that they commented on. You may wish to provide clear evidence of your knowledge of the subject as you appropriately design and deliver your classroom lessons, etc. I'm not going to read through each of these for you. Notice at the bottom we've included which core prop these align with. So she's got 2 from core proposition 2, 2 from core proposition 3, and 1 from core proposition 4. Okay, now, just at first glance, one of the things that I'm noticing is for this particular person, all of these are, you may wish to provide clear evidence. So to me, and we're going to get into that in a few slides also, but to me, that is a particular thing that this person can work on. Now, remember that there was a whole list of feedback statements that you can get. If you don't get every single one of those feedback statements, then the good news is some of these are strengths of yours. So here are the things from this person's component 3, level 2 feedback that were not given. So if they did not give these to her as feedback, that means that's a strength of hers. So look, core prop 1, she's got 2 pieces of strengths that come from core prop 1. So they did not say they needed clear evidence that she understands child development, or that she had fostered an equitable setting that provides a safe, intellectually challenging environment for her students. Use that as moments to feel good about what you've done and to say, how can I build on that? All right.
Look how many, lots of those had something to do with her environment. Even
look at, this. So what a great place to be as a kid.
She's a kindergarten teacher. Wouldn't you love to be in her kindergarten?
Yeah, sign me up for this woman's class, right? So just remember that just as we do with teachers, or just as we do with students, we are constantly going to give our kids feedback, not because they're terrible people and not because they suck, because we want them to be better. This is what these pieces of feedback are for. How can they help you be better? All right. So also be aware that there are some feedback statements that qualify as other. And here are some examples. This is taken from page 29 of your scoring guide. But sometimes you'll get an other feedback statements. And it can be anything from fewer students than required to you gave the wrong student work sample, or you used 2 videos from the same exact lesson and they told you not to do that. So if you have something that qualifies as other, you can look on page 29 for details about what those might be. If you're getting an other, you would be in the level 1 or the level 2 range. If you were in the level 3, level 4 range, there wouldn't be an other. Okay?
Okay, so then when Kate was talking about how each of those statements is aligned to the core props, and then she even noticed that there were trends that this teacher really had 2 strengths listed under core prop 1. She didn't have anything listed as a growth, or that she didn't get feedback that she needed to improve in core proposition 1. So one of the things that you may want to do with your statements is to really look at analyzing how those relate to the core propositions, and that this teacher, it's showing that she has more growth areas than strength areas in core prop 2 and 3, and then she also has some growth needed in 4, but it's kind of equal there, but that she had strengths in other and strengths across the board in core proposition 1. So one of the resources that could help her with those growth areas would be the What Teachers Should Know and Be Able to Do book. And this book is fully accessible online, and it's free, and you can sort that and look at it and just jump to those chapters. What's really nice about this book, it was updated about a year ago from the original document that was written in the 1980s, and it's got some really nice updates with some really current language and situations that we see as teachers. What's really great about it is it's written for all certificate areas. So it's a nice, succinct, short, compact text. So each core proposition is only about, maybe 5 pages, and they're small pages. So this is an easy overview to look at, to think about when they're saying that I'm really strong in core prop 1, what does that even mean? When they're saying I need growth in core prop 2, what are some things that they're talking about here, and what does that look like? So it's pretty dense. So each sentence can be a real area for growth for everyone.
So one of the things that you can use the scoring guide for is this comes from page 21 of the scoring guide. And this is that level 4 list for component 3. And you can use this as what is the essence? What are we aiming for in component 3? Because you got to figure if that's going to be the level 4, that's the goal, right? So as you're reviewing your own feedback, you can look at the feedback statements you got and compare them just in your own head to what we see here. And then after you've taken a few days, take some time, reread your entry, your component, your written commentary, to see how well you are aiming towards these things. Because these 5, this is specific to component 3, these 5 are really the goal of what we are aiming to give evidence for, right? Things like safe, fair, equitable, challenging environment, promoting self-directed learning, student engagement with all people in the room, student-centered learning, monitoring student learning, developing dispositions and proficiencies, and effectively communicating your decisions and reflecting on practice. All right, so this is the language that they are looking for, and this is the goal, the essence of component 3. So the thing that jumped out, like I said a few slides ago, for that example was all 5 of her growth statements said, you may wish to provide more evidence. And this is a thing that we see a lot with candidates, advanced candidates, first-time candidates, all candidates everywhere, all God's children. We need to work on evidence, because often what we think is evidence is really narration. Okay, I can tell you all about my college basketball career. I can tell you how impressive I was, how much it meant to me. I can tell you how I developed those skills. I can tell you how why I did what I did, how I got there. Without providing any evidence, you have no knowledge of whether or not that happened. And in reality, that never happened. If you knew me, I'm a mess. I can't walk down a street without twisting an ankle. You do not want me anywhere near a basketball court. We can say all kinds of things in narration, and you can analyze your own narration. But if you don't provide any feedback or any evidence, then it's just narration. So what do we talk about? What do we mean? How do you prove things? Well, if it's in a video, give me direct quotes. If it's in component 2 and you're looking at student work, you can use student work as a text, quote unquote, and cite evidence from a student's work. And that counts as a text in that sense. You can transcribe movements on a video. You can tell me exactly what is happening. The boy in the blue shirt walks over to the small group. That is transcribing a movement that happens in a video. Specific examples, even if you're not transcribing from student work, anytime you can give me specific examples from the work, that helps prove your point. And then don't forget that the commentary and whatever it is that is your quote unquote proof, if it's student work, if it's a video, if it's accomplishments, whatever it is, it must match. So if you're talking about one strategy or activity in your commentary, that video has to show that strategy or activity. If you're talking about a self-assessment, that self-assessment must be what's in the student work that you're citing, okay? We need to match them up. Keep clicking. Okay, so as we said, often we start with narration, all right? So here's everything that I know. I've read the questions on my component. Here's what they want to know, so I'm going to answer my questions. And so often candidates will write their responses first, and then they will go and look for evidence. They will create their written commentary, and then they will say, how can I support this with evidence? So they will go to student work. They will go to video. They will go to some assessment, either student or professional that they've created. Click, keep going. That's the wrong way to do it. You got to flip that arrow, okay? Instead, do it this way. Start with the evidence. What is my video showing me? What is the student work showing me? And then how can I use that to answer the questions that are being asked of me in these prompts? Because then you're going to be grounded in evidence. You're going to be grounded in that video, that student work, that professional assessment, that professional work, that student assessment. And then you're going to be able to explain it in a narration instead of the other way around. And then you're going to have more evidence supporting you.
So we've spent some time kind of, looking back, and that's important. I mean, you need to use that feedback. It's given to you, and there is more there than I think people realize. So spend some time analyzing your strengths and your areas for growth so that you don't make the same mistakes again. You don't want to do it just like you did it before. You want to do it based on those the growth that can be made by looking at those statements. So, but now, I mean, there comes a time when you need to put the old one away and start fresh with the new one. So now let's think about, after you've done that, what's going to be your plan moving forward? So, like, we spend some time, thinking about a lot of different things about your life and your situation, about whether or not you want to think of this as a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, whether you want to have a plan with a backup plan. There's a lot of different combinations depending on how many points you needed. Remember, they do take your highest one. So if you do redo something and you score lower, they will keep your higher score. But, you may want to think in terms of, I'm going to do this, right now, because let's face it, there's not a whole lot of time in this cycle left, because the deadline is July 31st to register for components for this cycle. So that will
January.
be January. What did I say?
July, I think.
I don't know.
Don't listen to that. January.
This month, January. So you have until the 31st of this month to register for what you're going to resubmit. So you may want to
pay for your component.
And pay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you may want to think in terms of, I'm going to do this now, and maybe it will get me close, but I'm going to start next year on this one in case I don't make it. So some things that you want to think about before you actually make your plan is, did you meet the floor score on the 2 big parts? So you have to have a 175 composite for the assessment center part. Did you meet that? So if not, you've got to redo some of that, because you have to have a 175 composite for that. And on the portfolio section, did you make at least a 175 on that? Now, 175 doesn't mean that that's enough points to pass. That just means it would really be hard to say that you are an accomplished teacher if you had lower than that. So the floor score is just that. It's just the minimum standard. You have to at least meet that. So make sure, and down on the bottom of your score report, it even has that listed, like yes, no, whatever. Met floor score here, met floor score here. So look at that. And if you have a no, you need to make a plan to fix that first. So then there is a really great tool, the calculator, that we're going to play with in a minute, that shows you the impact of taking different things, because they're weighted differently. Also, the cost can be a little bit different. Like on the assessment center, you can actually break that down into the 3 exercises, and those cost less. How much are those per assessment center exercise? Suzanne, do you remember?
I don't, but they're like prorated. So it would be
So it's like the whole thing
is to be exact, but it's in the
thing.
scoring guide. Yeah.
It's significantly less, which is nice, because you can just retake. Maybe, like, I was talking to a couple of teachers and they just didn't really study about play. And it says in their assessment center, one of the exercises is going to be about play. Well, that was a no-brainer for them. We didn't even really prepare for this. If we prepare for this, I know we can do better for this, So that will help when you think in terms of cost and breaking it down like into the smaller assessment center sections. Then you also need to just think about likelihood of improvement. Sometimes just because it was your lowest score doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to improve. If that's just an area where you feel like that's a general weakness, but something else that you scored lower than you, like maybe on component 3, which is weighted pretty heavily, you scored kind of low and you have more energy and more, just more excitement to do that, your likelihood of improving might be greater. So sometimes you have to play to your strengths too. So think about that. And then just other factors, whether you're going to try to do more than one this time or divide it over 2 years, those kinds of factors too need to be considered as you're making your plan. The score calculator we'll talk about, and Suzanne's going to walk us through some examples. But this pie chart gives you just an idea of the weight of different parts of the total process. So you can see if you redo component 3, it's a bigger piece of the pie. It carries more weight. The whole yellow part is the assessment center. So all of those together are pretty weighty. And then when you break down the different sections of that, you can see how much each part is worth. Component 4 and component 2 are both worth 15% of that total. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the weight of the different parts of the assessments.
All right, I'm going to stop my share for a minute as I go to the live calculator, so it'll just take a sec. So apologies while I get this up.
But I don't know if some of you all have played around with the calculator. It's pretty interesting. Just the way it, just a few points here or there can really change that final number. So depending on how far away you are from that 110, try some different scenarios and see what it does to your score. It's kind of fun to play with.
I was working with an advanced candidate, and we had a good time just punching numbers in. And ooh, what if this? And what if that? And ooh, that one looks good. Ooh, not that. Don't do that. And,
Hold on a second. I'm sorry. I'm having a little bit of glitch.
Uh-oh.
No, it's okay. It's just. I'm gonna move this over here.
The score calculator is pretty easy to find. The way I find it is I just go to search and put scoring calculator, and it comes right up on the National Board website. So that's the way I get to it. I'm sure there's other ways to get to it, but if you just search with that, it'll come up.
Okay, I think I'm ready. Sorry about that. Okay, can you all see the screen now that has the score calculator listed?
Yes.
Okay, so the first scenario that we were going to plug in, my computer's going a little slow. It's taking a minute to get happy. Here we go. Is someone who would get 2s all the way across their constructed response, 3.5 on selected response, and then 2s across the portfolio. And you can see that what's interesting about this score, so this is someone that I know, is that they met the floor score in every area, but they didn't hit the total weighted score of a 110. Their total score right now is at a 96. So some things that really stand out to me, knowing the weight of component 1 being so heavy, and knowing that this candidate in particular did not prepare at all for component 1. I'm not sure that he even knew what he was going to be assessed on, because of some things going on in his life. So if he were to prepare for component 1, knowing he's also can be a good test taker, and we put 3s in there, it significantly brings his score up, but still not to a point where he would hit the 110. So that brings it to a 105.
Can you scroll down, Suzanne? We're only seeing a part of your screen.
Is that better? Hold on, let me try making, is that better?
I can see it.
Oh, you know what? If you're having problems seeing the screen, if you go up to your toolbar and you look at like one of it is like viewing options, or like you can do like a make something fit to the screen. Do you see that, Kate, on yours? There's like.
All right, there you are.
Okay.
Good. Thanks. I learned something today.
All right. So I should have mentioned that to everyone because that can be a problem sometimes for people. Okay. So, so that brings his score to a 105. So even if he were to retake those component 1 exercises, he would still have to do a portfolio entry. Now, some of the things that's really nice about doing component 1 pieces over is that it, I think, takes a lot less preparation. And you have a little more time if you schedule your assessment in June. So that gives you some time if you were to do a portfolio entry. You could even like do the most of your preparation and studying after the portfolio submission is due. And it costs less unless you're retaking all of component 1 than a portfolio entry. So, this teacher in particular, he submitted component 2 first and felt like he didn't really understand the process as much when he did component 2, and his writing has gotten a lot better. So that was something he really wanted to retake this year, knowing that he felt like he could do a lot to improve that. So if he were to get a 3 there, he would certify. He would get a 111. But he also feels a little bit like that's cutting it kind of close, and he doesn't know if he can get 3s across all of those, or an average of 3 across those certificate areas. So this teacher is thinking about videotaping and planning through component 3 in the fall of next year when his caseload is a little easier as a high school teacher, because he's not dealing with ACT prep and testing and snow days and everything else that can hit second semester. So he's going to be prepared and just not do his component 3 write-up until he receives his scores. So that's sort of his 2-year plan and his backup plan. But if we, Holly, or Kate, did you have other ideas for this teacher? Or
well, component. No, I mean, I think that's good. I think component 3 would be kind of, I mean, of course, that one would be a great one to redo first, but you just don't have very much time at this point.
But some people, like if he may have felt really great about redoing this one for whatever reason, and if so, because of the weight, if he increased that gives him a much better chance of hitting that score.
Now, if he had not scored a 3.5 on the selected response, that's a great way to get your score up.
Yeah, we have a scenario like that in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to put it in a different one.
Okay.
So we've got okay, here's another one.
Ooh.
So this person met both floor score requirements and has a total weighted score of a 104. And
did really well on the selected response. Wow.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what really stands out to me is that component 3 with its heavy weight is below a 2, and all the other scores are quite a bit higher than that. So
what
if we were to
comes up a little,
even if this comes up a little, so let's see what happens if I even did like a 2.25 and would certify.
Wow.
Okay. So if it were me, that's where I would put my energy, unless there were other factors that needed to be considered.
Yeah, me too. Because that, if you said, I have to make a 3 on component 3, that might be, that to me, that's a lot scarier than thinking if I just get it up a little, I solidify. You shoot higher, but knowing that you've got a little cushion there.
Right.
Is nice.
All right, I'm going to put in one more, and this will be our last example. Oops. All right. So this person did meet both floor scores, but is pretty far away from the 110 with an 86. So one component probably isn't going to meet that jump.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty big. I mean, I think a 2-year, and that's the beauty of this, that you do have 2 years. So I think maybe this person would need to just sit down and think about a 2-year plan, because you don't want to just like rush and try to redo everything right now and not really accomplish anything. So I think definitely the selected response would be where I would put a lot of energy.
And, you know, it would be a big jump to get to a 3 there. So I don't know if that would be realistic, especially like if this is somebody who has test anxiety.
True.
That could be a lot of weight relying on that. So that's a factor that person would need to consider.
Or maybe they didn't study at all.
Right.
You know, and just thought, I'll just go in and, you know, and it's a lot of, it might have been stuff that they had forgotten about.
Yeah. So even with even if they redid 3, it's still not going to get to that point. They would also probably have to redo component 2. So it could be a combination of several factors, but it's really something to, that is a personal decision. So just because we're saying that, oh, I would maybe do this, this is knowing nothing about the other factors for these people. So I'm gonna go back to our. I'm gonna stop sharing and go back to the slides. Just 1 second. Thanks, Kate, for dropping that in the link in the text for everybody. It's going to take a second for it to come up. Okay.
So the next thing we're going to talk about are just some common potholes, detours, roadblocks, some things that might have gotten in your way of certification.
So I've got it. It's just taking a sec. I'm sorry, my computer's going slow. Why did it's jumping now. Just a second.
Well, so far,
I'm sorry. It's going really slow. So
there's a lot of people on this call, and actually it's done really well. I was worried that we would have a lot more glitches. So
while we're looking at this particular screen, there have been a number of questions in the chat about how to study for component 1. And I just wanted to point out, even though I don't have a specific one go-to website, my favorite advice to give people is to find the professional organization that aligns with your certification area. So for me, as early adolescent ELA, I had 2. So it's NCTE and ILA, which is the International Literacy Association. And I went there first. And I looked at what was on component 1. I looked at the categories, and I said, you know, if this is the national professional organization, then they're going to know. And I just used them as my starting place. And then, of course, you can go down rabbit holes and find other good things. But if you don't have a place or an idea of how do I even jump into this, those are the people I would go to first, just to help, you know, narrow things down.
Sorry, I apologize for all that jumping around.
So these are some of the things that we've noticed as some common issues, and as Kate had mentioned earlier, just evidence. And I think many of you have mentioned that evidence is the thing that came up in your feedback. Also, in my cohort, you know, the procrastination was, you know, it's really hard sometimes in the midst of everything else that we have to do as really busy teachers to not put things off. And the longer that you do, then you just don't have time for feedback from other people. So the feedback from other people is really important. And so the sooner you can get some things written and get it to people to read and give you feedback, I mean, that's going to help you.
Yeah, and just making sure that that your instructional goals are actually goals and not just an activity, and making sure that when you measure your assessments, when you're measuring learning, that it is tied tightly to those learning goals. Holly mentioned earlier how important it is to read everything, not just your specific portfolio directions, but also the standards and general directions, which often get overlooked. And I've also seen in looking through people's component narratives after they got feedback that they were disappointed with, then that I felt like they either didn't answer all of the prompts that were in the questions, or that maybe the balance was off. So they're saying, suggested page length, 6 pages for analysis, and I'm seeing 3 pages there. And maybe they have a lot more pages in a different area. But as a general rule, if you are not writing to those, if you're having a hard time getting it if you're not having a hard time meeting page length limits, if you don't have to cut anything, then you don't have enough evidence. But just because you're meeting page length doesn't mean that you have evidence, but it should be hard to meet the page lengths. You should have a lot to say. A question that I'm seeing come up, and I know, Kate, you've addressed some of this already with component 1, but I see people a lot that make the assumption that component 1 is not really something you can prepare for, and they feel like you either know it or you don't. And I would say that in my case, that wasn't true at all. One of the things that's really important to know is that you're going to be assessed on content that you probably don't know real well because it's outside of the age that you teach. So when I certified, I was a preschool teacher, but I had to know the content up through 3rd grade. And I'm not even certified in Kentucky to teach those grades. So it wasn't even in my preparation program. But I had to study for that. And part of that for me was I went to the very best teachers I could find that taught those grade levels. And I asked them the questions that I knew were going to be on there. Like, I knew that math misconceptions was on there. So I would say, what's the biggest math misconceptions that you see in 2nd grade or 3rd grade? And how do you fix that? What do you teach them? What are your favorite lessons? And I just studied, or like, what's a good book that I should be reading? Or I don't know enough about how kids learn this. How did you learn? Or what's the resource I should be using? So I think, using other teachers is a big thing. I also looked to the professional organization for my age range, the NAEYC. So there are released prompts, and study those. Time yourself using the released prompts, just like you would do if you were preparing your students for a selected or an open response questions. Then on those charts where it tells you how many multiple choice, like what the percentage is of the weight of what the topics are going to be in your multiple choice questions, really consider that. So if it's something that you don't know a whole lot about, but it's only going to be maybe like 1 or 2 questions, then don't stress too much about that and emphasize spending time on things that are weighted more heavily. There is this testing platform that you will use at the testing center if you haven't already done component 1. I highly recommend downloading that in advance so you're not getting familiar with this weird platform while you're already nervous. You can download that with the links in the component 1 directions. And there's this interesting balance, and it depends on your certificate area, between pedagogy and content knowledge for component 1. It's not all content knowledge. Some of it is how you teach that, and what are the misconceptions, and can you analyze this piece of student work? And it depends a lot on your certificate area. Typically, the higher age of student you teach, the less it is on application and pedagogy, and the more it is straight content, but that's not true in every case. I know Kate, and Kate is an ELA person, and then we also see in the science, and I know there's other certificate areas where even in the high school questions, you're going to be seeing some application and pedagogy. And a lot of people assume that they're not going to be assessed or measured on the standards, and the standards are aligned to component 1, and they are listed in the directions, and I highly recommend reading those, especially to understand what best practice is, which could help with the multiple choice and selected response. Any other thoughts that you two have on component 1, or does that cover it?
I think that's good.
I think that about covers it.
Okay. You can retake parts of component 1 instead of the entire thing. Oh, and in the scoring guide, there are some helpful questions on pages 19 and 20, more than what's listed here on how to evaluate your performance on component 1. So this is after you've already received your scores and some guidance to help you really think about your performance on that. There are not similar questions like this for the portfolio components, but in those areas, it's really helpful to look at those rubrics that show what a 4 would look like, or accomplished practice would look like for components 2, 3, and 4. And those are on page 21 of the scoring guide that we looked at for when we looked at our component 3 example. All right, Holly?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was typing.
Okay.
For component 2, that's the one about differentiation. So I think it's really important to always keep that essence of the component in your mind. If you're not really showing lots of differentiation in this, then you're really not hitting the main thing that this component is about. So again, as Kate said, too much description and not enough evidence. Evidence is key, because you have to have enough evidence to show that you meet the standards. Using student work as the text, and then just focusing on differentiation for the group. If you did that too much, I mean, this one is really focused on these two. In mine, it was 2 individual kids that you were focused on. I think different people may have a little different focus depending on what's appropriate for your certificate area. So you want to read your own directions very carefully and make sure you meet the criteria. But it's really about drilling down to individual students. Whereas when we get to component 4, it's broader. But component 2 is really like honing in with a real specific plan and differentiation for particular children.
Okay, so for some ideas for the most common potholes on component 3, in each content area or each certification area, there has to be some aspect of what they call constructing meaning. So kids have to do the construction of meaning themselves. We often call this inquiry. Not every certification explicitly uses the word inquiry, but since it's students constructing meaning themselves, that's 99% of the time what they're talking about, even if they don't use the word. Don't forget to focus on the commentary. That's a common pitfall. Yes, they're going to view your video, but the video is not scored. The video is used as in support of the commentary. So the commentary really has to be the evidence, and you have to cite the evidence from the video and have the description and have the analysis all in that commentary itself. That's the only thing that gets scored. Don't forget that in component 3, it's really easy to show one thing. You want to show as many things as possible. You want to show a breadth of instruction. You want to show different strategies, different settings, different contents, if that's appropriate for your certification area. Also, sometimes we've seen people try to reflect their way out of a bad lesson. And this is kind of a double-edged sword. We often say, don't let good get in the way of perfect. Don't or throw out a video because it's not 100% perfect. Yes, you're human, your kids are human. No one expects the world's most beautiful video. On the other hand, if this is a bad video, you can't reflect your way out of a video in which 43 bad things happen. You're going to have a bad day. That's 100% fine. We all do. Don't use that video. And that really ties into the next piece too. You should plan to use a video that elicits the evidence that they want. They're asking specific questions. They're asking you for specific things. Show us where there's student-to-student engagement. Show us where there's student-to-teacher engagement. If you don't have any of that in your video, then don't use that video. Read the directions both in the general portfolio and in your specific component 3 to know specifically what they're asking for, and then plan to videotape a lesson that shows those things. Don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole after the fact. Make sure that you have evidence of your instruction impacting student engagement. It's not enough to show student engagement. You also have to connect that back to you and what you've done to make that happen. And then make sure you have both student to teacher and student to student interaction. There's also, we get questions a lot about, well, what counts as this? What counts as small group? What counts as this? There's a glossary of terms in the general portfolio instruction that's really helpful. So that's where we always send people with advice for questions like that. And then I will mention just briefly before we move on, there are some questions in the chat. I'm not sure this is the appropriate place for it, but I'm going to say it now. There are other videos that we have done. There's a component 4, well, there are a whole bunch of videos, honestly. There's a component 4 video. There are other component specific videos. There's a writing one just on how to write for national boards, where we really dig into a lot of this evidence stuff. And those are all, they're done by a combination of the 3 of us at some level, and they're all on the kynt3.org website, or on Suzanne Farmer is her full name. It's on her YouTube page. So if there's a piece of this that you think, oh, I really want to dig in more deeply, probably somewhere there is an hour or 2 hours of us talking you through that.
And eventually those videos are going to be moving and duplicated on the KY NBCT network website, because the KYNT3 website won't live forever. It's grant related. So, but another thing I hear a lot with component 3 is people ask me, well, when they're doing a small group, can they pull that group during like the specials period, or like pull them into a different room so there's less distractions in the background? No, don't do that, because the whole point is showing that you're able to manage the needs of the group and the needs of different types of groups at the same time. So it wouldn't be authentic at all. And
keep it real. It's not afraid.
Right. Yeah.
And also, if you're doing like a certain strategy with the whole group, don't do that same strategy with a small group. I mean, that gets to that breadth.
Right.
You know, if you're doing direct instruction with your large group, for sure don't do the same thing just with a group of 6. How would your instruction be different for a big group and a small group? And like really show that.
We want to see you doing the most good things for kids.
Yeah, in the past, the 2 videotaped entries were separate, and they were very intentional about combining the 2 videos into one component and making it twice the weight in the revision process, because they want to force you to show breadth. Mm-hmm. They want to make sure that it's a holistic view of how you handle all of that. All right, and speaking of like the big picture of intentionality with component 4, this is the component that has changed the most since in the new process. And when this component was being created, the internal name for it, for the people that were creating this component at National Board, the teachers that worked on that, was knowing your kids. So the big picture here is, how do you know your students? And we see a lot of people that make assumptions that because, especially in Kentucky, the way this reads, it reads very much like data and assessment literacy. So people make some assumptions that data means numbers, and that's not what they're asking here. Of course, data can be numbers, but it's not just numbers. It is personality. It is engagement with parents. It's feedback. It's really looking at all of those stakeholders that are going to inform how you know what's best for kids and what they need and what you need to know as a professional. All of those pieces should be looked at from multiple stakeholder groups and not just your view.
And to kind of get an idea about what that might sound like or feel like, go back to the green book that Suzanne linked and look at Core Prop 1 and read what it says about knowing and understanding students, and think in terms of knowing your students in those ways. You know, numbers are part of it, but there's so much more to it than that.
Well, there's a lot of forms in Component 4. If you haven't done it yet, it'll probably surprise you. It's a lot more forms than any other component. the forms are scored. Many of those forms count as part of your narrative. And what I noticed last year was a lot of people put those forms off till last, which might work for the other components, but for this it doesn't. So you're going to want to start with your forms or do the forms while you're writing your narrative, because you shouldn't say the exact same thing in your forms and in your narrative. They should complement one another, but it really shouldn't just be a duplicate, because your assessor is going to be reading all of it. So this is an opportunity for you to tell the assessor everything that you can about your kids. And if you repeat yourself, that's just not giving you that full opportunity. Holly, I know that your feedback from the assessor also was heavily around this, those last two bullets too.
Yes, just the one of our network members was one of the assessors for component 4 in literacy, and she said a real issue she saw was that the formative assessments and the summative assessments didn't align. So just making sure that you are formatively assessing the things that are leading up to your summative assessment. And also just that whole idea of, there's this idea that the professional need and the student need have to be the same or be like together somehow. They really don't. She said it's fine for those to be totally different things. So those were just a couple of things that she mentioned, along with, she said that she just wanted to go home and cry because the knowledge of student part was just number after number after number and nothing about anything else. So those were the big 3 takeaways that I got from her on that.
And this component has really changed since its original, in the previous version of National Board. And what it used to look like was it was a lot about how do you lead, learn, and collaborate, and then how does that impact your students. Mm-hmm. It's been really nice the way they've revised this, because it forces you to start with, what do my students need? And if you're not starting with what your students need, then you're missing a big point of this component. It was very intentional that the work that you're doing should start with student need. Anything else on component 4? You guys ready for the next slide?
I think we're ready.
Okay. Oh, it's going slow a second again. There we go.
So, as we're going through this, you're going through your journey. I think an important part is just don't go it alone. Find a bus, find some people to connect with, other NBCTs in your building, other groups. I know in Kentucky, we have several different places where you can connect with NBCTs and other people, other candidates. I think we encourage you to reach out to people. People are more willing to help than you realize, I think. Mm-hmm. Other NBCTs know how important this is and what a risk that you're taking, really, and they want you to be successful. So you just can't procrastinate and ask them, can you read this tonight and give it back to me tomorrow? So you just need to enlist the help of other people. Don't be afraid to ask other people to help, and don't go it alone. There are several resources that you can go to. The National Board Advanced Candidate Facebook group. I've been looking at that. It's a great group, and the administrators in that group are so helpful and give really great, really fast feedback on questions. So if I were you, I would join that group right away. There's also the candidate video, the resources that we made last year about the different components that people have been talking about in the chat, and Suzanne just mentioned those a few minutes ago. KEA, Eddie was on earlier. He's the vice president of that, and they have several different opportunities for you to go to Jump Starts, or Home Stretch is a great opportunity to get with other people to read your components. Then the Kentucky NBCT Network, we have a group of about 100 NBCTs, and I know that especially if you're a Kentucky teacher, if you contact me, I can help find some people that will give you some feedback on your components. There's also CAPE. I've heard that they offer some reading of components for Kentucky teachers. And then the regional cooperatives. I work at the West Kentucky Co-op. I know that Angie Gunter at GREC, she has candidate support there. So reach out to your regional cooperatives and ask them what kind of supports they offer for national board candidates.
So in other states, you can also look on your state page and nbpts.org to see what resources are available in your state. And if you're looking to see if there are board certified teachers in your district or area, you can use the National Board Directory to search on the National Board website. That's not always completely current because it relies on NBCTs to keep their information up to date. So as people transfer districts, they don't always update that page, but it can be a starting place. And I encourage everybody, no matter what state you're in, to reach out to your district and ask them, you know, what do you do to support candidates? Because even if they're not doing anything and you know they're not doing anything, the more people that ask, the more they're going to consider adding that as a way to support their teachers. And that's how we've gotten some of the supports in Kentucky and different places was by demand. So consider that too. And I think we still have a question it looks like you guys are trying to answer in the chat box that's come up. I was trying to navigate that too. We've had so many comments, it's hard to keep up. So, you know, although your journey may have some twists and turns and it may be a little longer than you had initially thought, you're still going to get there. And you may have even more to learn from your extended trip. I know that we are over time, and I definitely want to thank all of you all for taking the time to join, especially Kate and Holly for your great insight, and our NBCTs, Jennifer, Rebecca, and Eddie, that joined us earlier to share their personal stories. I will remind you all that I will be transferring. I'll save this and upload it into that YouTube channel, and I will send it out to everyone through Eventbrite. I know that there are some people who their emails have been blocked. They're not allowing the emails to go out through Eventbrite. So please make sure that your colleagues or other teachers get that link through the YouTube channel, or you can send it to them, because some people, their districts are not allowing those emails to go through Eventbrite. And we will let you all know. We'll put it out on social media again and through other channels if we do any more webinars this spring. And if you have any questions that haven't been addressed, you can drop those into the chat box or raise your hand to use the mic. We can probably stay on for maybe 10 more minutes. And we're way over already.
So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone,
for joining us. And there's still some questions in the chat box. We could, like they said, we can stay on for a few minutes. This question about the formative summative assessment, maybe we can all kind of talk about that. Somebody asked.
Can you review the question? I'm having a hard time finding it now.
I don't know what it was exactly. It said,
it was, can you use the same assessment for both the formative and the summative?
Mm-hmm.
I would want to know, like, why? Like,
and I just put, I feel like the formative would be something leading to the summative.
Mm-hmm.
Really the same.
And my comment was, yeah, I would never reuse something only because I want the chance to show as many different things as I possibly can. And so if I reuse something, I feel like I'm shooting myself in the foot.
Well, and it kind of seems like you're planning would show up stronger, that you've taken this end goal and broken it down to these steps. And now I'm assessing to see how close they are here. And if they mastered this before I go to this, before I go to this.
Right.
So it leads to that summative is what I would think.
No, here's the comment too about pre-assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment. I think there's also a lot of confusion around self-assessment. So the self-assessment piece, one of the things I've noticed when I read a lot of component 4 last year, was that often when I would read somebody's narrative, that they were including something as a self-assessment that actually wasn't a self-assessment, or it was like maybe wrong answer analysis, or it wasn't really the student analyzing and thinking about where they are. It was the teacher telling them you got these things wrong and the student reflecting on that, which is different than, to me, a self-assessment. So I think that there is a lot in the standards around how you help students with self-assessment. There's some in the Green Book as well, but it gets a lot more specific about what self-assessment looks like in each person's standards. And it can be done. One of the teachers that I worked with last year, who I felt had an exceptionally strong piece of self-assessment, was a preschool teacher. And she had her students, she really felt like there's no way that I feel like at first she was trying to force something that she didn't feel her students needed. She was saying, gosh, I really feel like I should be doing math or something that's so easy to assess, that's like cut and dry. And then she really looked at her student needs and she's like, but they don't need math. What they need to know is they need to know social skills. So she went through this struggle of trying to figure out how to help her kids self-assess social skills and how to really write appropriate goals for that. And she came up with a really rich and meaningful way to do that. And that was important, that she stayed true to her kids, even if it didn't feel like the easy way. If she had forced something that wasn't authentically what her students needed, she wouldn't have got what she needed out of that. Her students wouldn't have got what they needed out of that. And I would imagine her score would have reflected that.
Okay, Susan, do you, this one question here about how were the C4 directions changed as I read they were Friday? I haven't heard that they were changed, so I don't know.
I haven't read that they've been changed, but I can look into that. And if they've been changed, I would only imagine it's to clarify, because there was some feedback given from the people in my role that some of the directions were a little bit confusing. So I don't think that they're changing the component itself, or even like the questions that they give you to answer. I think it would just be some clarifying updates.
Making it more clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure. But I don't think they're really changing anything other than maybe some clarity.
All right, so let's see. This question about using progress monitoring. So this progress monitor weekly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a running record kind of thing, probably.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I would say is around that specific situation, because the district where most of my candidates come from does something very, very similar. And at first blush, that looks like a great thing to use because it's a built-in thing and it's not different. It's not an additional thing for your kids. But the challenge that my candidates were having with that was because it wasn't their assessment, they couldn't show actual examples of it. They had to talk about it very vaguely, and they couldn't be as intentional around why they were giving that assessment and why they were choosing that kind of questions and, why we're looking at these standards. So it wasn't that there was anything bad about it, but they just kept kind of rewriting and not being happy with it and not being able to say anything worthwhile. And finally, I just kind of asked the question, how important to you is it that you use these assessments if it's not giving you good stuff to talk about? And they all kind of looked at each other and they all decided that they were not going to use them anymore and do their own. And then they had more things to say. So I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with using that, but if it's not giving you the juicy stuff to talk about and it's not letting you show your own planning and intentionality, then maybe it's not the best choice for component 4.
Well, and you can include it as part of the data that you're considering, but adding assessments that your own that are more aligned to what you really are trying to work on and talk about. So it just gives you more tools in your tool bag of
Right.
like some triangulated data. But
this school's struggling to make it your own thing. That 100% was their problem.
And you can talk about, like, that's an honest thing. They ask you, like, are there district tests that you have to give? And, you can honestly say, I have to give these things, and it's hard for me to find the time to do this other thing that I know I really need to do, but I'm trying to make it work. And that, it's an honest struggle for teachers that are required in our high stakes accountability system to do assessments that are out of our control. So we just got about 3 more minutes. If it's easier for you to grab the mic, just raise your hand. Okay, thank you for that. It does say they've added some clarification on submission requirements somewhere between pages 6 and 8. Yeah, I was thinking that was what it was.
Interesting.
So repeat that. So they've added some clarification
on the submission requirements. This is for component 4, somewhere between pages 6 and 8 in the directions.
Okay.
Now I'm curious, what's on 6 and 8? No, I gotta go back and find it.
I don't know if we got to the questions in the chat box or not.
I lost track of them towards the end. They were coming in so fast.
I think
we did.
I think we got most of them.
Oh, there was a question, will the chat be included in the transcripts? I will save the chat, but I don't think that's something I can, it's going to be harder for me I don't know that I'll be able to send it out because it doesn't save into the YouTube channel. So I can try to put it in an email, but I don't think that Eventbrite allows me to do attachments. So if it's something you want, that might be tough. And I also find that the chat can be really hard later because even if you have the file, you don't know when the questions are being asked and what questions people are referring to sometimes.
Right.
So if there's something that you want out of the chat, I think that you have the option when you exit to save the chat, but I'm not sure.
I was looking to see if there was any links in the chat that maybe
you could copy and paste parts of the chat if you wanted them before you hop off too.
I think the only link we had was to the score calculator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about the links to the videos, but I didn't actually put in those.
Well,
we talked about links on National Board that I didn't actually put them in.
All right. So anybody else have a question before we hop off?
All right, I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.